Yes, I'm recording. So, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Gautam. Good morning, Usha. Good morning, Kili. Nice to see you after a long, long time. And this we started this online film screening once the lockdown was imposed, and we've been doing this. This is a 28th screening, and in between we had two, three film festivals, and initially like we had large number of people attending the program, and slowly the numbers have really like gone down. But we record it and we share the interaction with in the Facebook, YouTube, and we have our own blog and we share all our recordings. So there's a kind of a compilation of interactions. So the future generation will get benefited, hopefully.
Yeah. Or it's a nice
You need a
archive.
foresight, you see. so, so we the foresight we are recording it and we are sharing it. Yeah. So I just, let me start with asking few questions about the film, and then maybe Killy will join. Others will come and join. Let me just start with the film, and um we were remember so Gautam, we were discussing about this film, and you suggested that you made films, two three films, similar films on the same topic, on especially on cities and urbanization and development. Usha also has written about her, in a write up about herself. She also wrote about development and cities. So, what is his interest? What is your interest? What is his interest on this particular topic? On urban cities or cities and development, and so how did you develop this idea? You know, how did you come? How did you get this interest? Mm.
So Usha, you start because cities. The weak link that I had made when I sent you my when we spoke is more to do with technology and society, and of course, cities is where you find that. But Usha's interest has been on cities and in Bangalore. We happened to connect about whenever 15 years ago or something when we started speaking about this film, and we thought we'd do it on the outskirts of Bangalore. But then we found that change happened within Bangalore. So let Usha answer this question because that's really her area.
Yeah, but I think Amudhan's question is also about how did the idea of the film come about, which you can speak about and then I can join.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I'd shifted to Bangalore from Delhi about 20 years ago, and even at that time, I was half thinking of making film in the city and looking at changes brought about by like this kind of well, even if not high tech, but infrastructure, and the huge investments that were being made in infrastructure, and a lot of them are towards. You've gone off, Amudan. Why?
No, no,
You're
I'm
like,
there. I'm there. I'm there. I'm there. I may have to in between. I have to admit the people, so I have to check
oh
that
yeah,
that screen
yeah,
also. I'm there.
and Kili. When once I came to Bangalore, that I found Usha was also working on change in the city, and change often happens at the periphery of the city rather than in the middle of the city. And we'd been toying with the idea, but both of us were busy with other things, and we just let it lie. And sometime in 2008, which is when we started shooting, we found that major changes were happening within the city itself, uh, including MG Road, which is the main boulevard in Bangalore. Are you also from Bangalore, Kili, or are you from Chennai, or?
He's in
No,
Delhi now,
okay,
but he's a
okay,
yeah.
fine. So, and of course, the
But
metro
many of us
being,
know MG Road in Bangalore, so especially South Indians.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a much beloved walkway for many Bangaloreans. I'm not, an old Bangalorean, but Usha and many of her friends must have hung around there during their college days and things like that. So the initial idea for the film was quite limited. It was only limited to that stretch. And then, but we found that the issues that that was raising actually extended well beyond. And many of the activists we met and started filming, they were working on issues throughout the city, similar kind of issues of, one is of just uh, restructuring, re-architecturing the city in the mold of this kind of global city, and also of displacement of people, initially of shopkeepers, then of homeowners, and at least in many of the cases they were investigating, they found that compensation had not been offered, at least to the extent promised. Um, so we, from there it expanded, and we started following the metro in other places also. And we also then we found it was closely connected to road widening, and essentially to also uh, kind of changing the city in a way that maybe was difficult to do without this this reason, if you like, or this holy cow of development, the metro. And around that same time, the Bangalore airport was also being made, and a whole bunch of other things were happening. The metro, contrary to one imagines its stated objective, started going out of the city too, or to the peripheries and to the suburbs, and new suburbs were being created because the metro was going there. So, in fact, in many ways, it would probably actually contribute to the congestion of the city. They, you know, the stated objective was that it would decongest the city, and would also take people away from cars, and therefore result in less pollution. Um, and no doubt it is, once it's up and running, it perhaps is a cleaner form of transport, but there are many environmental costs to be paid, besides financial costs, to get there. And at least many of the activists we followed, who made actually a lot more sense to us than the metro officials, who were also willing to admit us and speak to us, and have a dialogue with us. They seemed to indicate that there were much better and much cheaper ways to go, if providing transport to the city was the real objective. So yeah, so I guess that's a bit of a long answer to that question, but that's how we started.
Yeah. Usha, you want to?
Yeah. So the whole idea of this the reason why I started working on cities, and why we Gautam and I started talking about this film, is because what we see happening in the beginning of 2000 is that, and it had actually started in Bangalore much before, in the early 90s, where there is this idea of what a city should look like and who is the city for. And one of the very obvious and openly stated thing is for capital, for international capital. So in our case, it happened to be IT, BT, and uh, the call centers, BPOs, etc., which were servicing uh, companies abroad. And so the whole idea that a city is what is quote unquote developed to enable this kind of a this kind of a economic activity, I thought, and I think that's a conversation we had also, Gautam and I had, is has a lot of very uh, disastrous consequences for people who are living in the city, because it is catering to a very small segment of people in the city, A, and secondly, it's a very narrow way of looking at cities, whereas cities are places where people actually live. That is where they make their lives, they build friendships, they follow their interests, they make a livelihood, they make a living. So cities are places where people inhabit. Now, that was so my interest has been, even as a student of anthropology, was to look at why is it that cities suddenly get these very trendy kind of names. Like, for instance, Bangalore started being was called the pub city, and I started thinking, but Bangalore is not a pub city. Pubs are there in Bangalore, but there's lots more happening. And in the idea of expanding and modernizing Bangalore, what is happening to the other Bangalores? So that was a question that we had in mind. And initially we were thinking of looking at weavers, Gautam, if you remember, um, that which is a very old industry in Bangalore. And what happened to the weavers in this course of this um, modernization of Bangalore or development of Bangalore? So that was one large question. And when we started looking at what was happening to Bangalore in 2008, as Gautam pointed out in his response, is that in the name of development, there were a lot of two things. There was one, no transparency, no democratic kind of involvement of people who are affected by the development. For instance, you broaden a road, you're not talking to the people who are affected by that road widening. You have made up your mind that this is a blueprint and you're going ahead because you're following this idea of what a global city should look like. So that was one thing that was stood out. And secondly, that all these things that were happening happened together. There were protests about the metro cutting down trees. There was protests about demolitions. There was protests about road widening. It was like as if the whole city was in a churn. And that is the moment in which we entered because people are feeling lost. They were feeling angry. They were feeling lost because suddenly what they thought was their city was no longer their city. And it was a time at which now we've got used to that kind of change. But there was a time in which you would everything would be dug up overnight and there would be no indication that it was being done. So that was how we started working on the film. And
Hmm.
initially we did look at, we said, okay, let's just follow the metro. But then we saw how it's connected to everything. And like Vinay says in the film, Metro, road widening, Leo, Vinay, all of them say that they're all linked and in a way that they want to produce a certain kind of their idea of a global city.
Hmm. Um,
Sorry, is that too long?
yes, yes. No, 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 no problem. Fine, perfect. We just need a detailed explanation. I'm also curious to know how did you share the responsibilities while making the film? You're a researcher, a writer, anthropologist, or filmmaker. How did both of you share the responsibilities as a filmmaker?
Go ahead, Usha. I started the.
Go ahead.
No, no, you go ahead.
No, no, that's fine.
No, I think
Because you also Gautam, because you can explain, because I see your filmography, you have worked with other filmmakers, you seem to be very interested in working with the others, you seem to be have a you're keen in working with people while making a film, because many filmmakers are working alone. So I am quite interested about
so. I've worked with one other filmmaker. Otherwise, it's mostly some activist or an anthropologist. Actually, most. Well, so I haven't done that many independent films, but coding culture I worked with Carol. This time, this our Metropolis with Usha, and then I'm now doing two films with whom, and I'm working with one of them. I'm doing on my own, meaning I'm directing it on my own, but there may be somebody else who's kind of helping or working along with me through the whole process. Um, but one film, that is the Tirugata thing, I collaborated with another filmmaker, who came on actually more at the editing stage. So she's the editor, but she came for one schedule, but mostly at the editing stage. But she contributed a lot, so she's also credited as the co-director. Um, it's hard to say. I mean, it's on a daily basis. Our roles keep shifting a little bit here, a little bit there. On the whole, I think we are co-directors. The definition of that term is also a bit vague, no? I mean, are you clear exactly what a director does as opposed to an editor, a cinematographer, writer, or I mean, there is a lot of overlap in those roles, and maybe if it's like a well-oiled machine where, like Hollywood or Bollywood, where everything is set and people come in to perform a certain role and then go away, maybe it's easier to delineate. In our case, this is an independent film, and we took 5 years over making it, 4 to 5 years, and there were many roles that both of us played. Usha is also the sound recordist for the film. I'm the camera person. Initially, we started editing it together. We had a rough cut when we went to this post production workshop. And then there we met Obro. And actually, he suggested working on it, and we were initially a bit hesitant to let go of this and hand it over to somebody else. But he did a great job, I think, and managed to make it work in a way that maybe we were not being able to do. He managed to bring everything together in a way that we didn't manage to. Yeah, so I do think that unlike a writer who works largely on her or his own, and might have an editor coming in, but that is a more limited, maybe a sort of an advisory kind of role or a consultant role. I don't know. I'm not sure how writers and editors work together, book editors. It may be that in some cases, the role of the editor is much more than simply that of a consultant or an advisor. But in a film, I think there's a lot of overlap. I mean, especially today with editors, I think many editors have a great role in structuring the film, have a great role in defining what exactly the film is about, actually, because a lot of films are found on the editing table. And so it's hard to I find it hard, at least, to clearly separate those roles. What did you think, Kusha?
Yeah, I think that it's again very. It also was a. It grew as it happened because initially, we didn't talk about this at all. We didn't really discuss it. And this kind of film is a bit different from other kinds of films where, like, for instance, it was not like I was going and doing the research on the ground, talking to people before. The research and the filming happened together, actually. So as we were filming, we were, actually there was no separation. Otherwise, sometimes the researcher or the sociologist or the anthropologist will go and do a ground. uh, to the extent that I had worked on these ideas, I suppose that was only the base. So we actually stepped into, and I was there through all the shoots. I was doing the sound. I learned how to do the sound. And so we were there throughout, and we would make joint decisions as to what is to be filmed, what is not to be filmed. But since Gautam was doing the camera work, so he made his choices on the floor, and so I worked along with him. And then when it came to the editorial decisions, we discussed everything and we decided how it should go and where it should, how should the narrative go and what are we trying to do. So these are the things that we discussed as we were working through it. So it was not a very, it happened. And also, this is the, we would go for one sequence, we went 3 days in the middle of the night. So it is something that both of us worked on, because, and it was, I think, also possible because there were two of us doing this, and lots of coordination had to be done, and keeping in touch with the, so we just kind of brought all our energies together. And of course, Gautam, and since the camera is such an important part of a film, obviously, so those choices were his. And we decided, like, for instance, what to include, what not to include, whom should we follow, whom should we not follow, whom should we focus on. So I think, yeah,
Yeah.
so it was
No,
rather
thank.
And perhaps when it came to music, then I'd say that Usha had a larger role in that. We had a person who is known, has been known to Usha for a long time. The two people who have done the music, and I think she has a greater role than me in creating that music. So,
Yeah.
so yeah.
also
Yeah.
the final edit on the soundtrack. I sat with Obro and we sat
Mm.
together.
Okay. Uh, okay. So when I want to discuss about the film style. The film is not a very enforcing film. It's not an enforcing film. It's not taking an aggressive stand against development or ambitions of people, or the government employees or the politicians. There is a kind of ambiguity in the whole treatment where you trying to give the benefit of doubt to all the characters in the film, So how did you arrive at that point? I mean, because when you're discussing about development, one is very concrete. When is when but when the film comes, there's always a ambiguity, and it's trying to give a space for the other uh, views and other confusions and aspirations, the slips, and uh, so I want to know about that.
So I actually that film more than the earlier film, which is about these three software companies. I'd say our Metropolis is much less ambiguous. It is much more forceful it's much clearer about what it's saying. It has an experimental element to it in the editing, but just in terms of, I mean, we were very clear on whose side we were, and I at least speak for myself, but I don't think that um, is ambiguous in that way. The earlier, in fact, when we screened it at DocWalk, some of the people who'd seen my earlier series, they said it's hard to believe it's the same person who's made it, because they thought this is very activist in orientation, meaning that we were pushing a certain agenda, a certain point. Um, but I mean, I think the editing may have transformed that somewhat, and made it, a film which I don't know if it has multiple readings. To me, somehow our own sympathies, I think, are very clear. Yeah. So whereas the earlier one, it's more like we were fascinated by what was happening inside those software companies. So we're not taking a strong stand uh, against the existence of software companies in Bangalore. I mean, that was not the purpose of the film. The purpose of the film was to enter those spaces and get to experience what it's like there, and get to know some of the people who are running those companies, as opposed to here, where our purpose was, we knew what we wanted from a scene before we went in. So yeah, but Usha, you wanted to say?
Interesting, because we've shown it to many people. I mean, it's had multiple screenings, as you know, and many of those screenings, people have come out and felt that it has taken a very firm stand against development. And in fact, we've been asked, but don't you think the metro is essential? Why are you anti-development? Why are you anti-metro? Or don't you think that, or change is inevitable? We were asked this even in an FD screening in Mumbai, actually. So it's a interesting thing for me to see that it's actually read in very different ways. It is not like Anand Patwardhan's film, where it is, it's very hard, kind of hard line. It is, it uses humor. In that way, there is a kind of a stylistic departure also from sort of the. It is not what they call a campaign film or an activist film in that sense, but it is, and it's also, it's I think presenting certain things with a touch of humor, with the use of a little bit of sequences that are not exactly, for instance, let me just take an example. For instance, the whole sequence with the academics who are talking about the city and the street. We're actually, including us, we are also making fun of ourselves. We are just gently making fun of them, saying that okay, people are talking about the city, but what is actually happening on in the streets and in the city. So for instance, that, and the bit about the architect, in fact, he was furious. He said, I've been made a villain in this film, but he was very good natured about it. He has shown the film in his own office and all that. He's also an old friend. So it really is interesting, because people have read this in very different ways. But you're right, it is not something that is, sort of presenting. In fact, it is, I would say it's presenting two points of view, but we are actually presenting the other point of view in not a very flattering light. And people have caught on to that. But it's just interesting to see that people can read it in different ways. Yes, in that sense, it's not a very direct kind of a narrative either, because what we were trying to do is also capture the feeling of what it meant for people to be in the city when all these things were happening. So a sense of loss is there, sense of inevitability of change is there, and the sense of being shut out from decisions is there. All those things.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. Let me also ask about aesthetics of the film, like, in terms of photography, in terms of editing, in terms of sound, in terms of music. Gautam, would you say that it is in continuation with your previous films, or there was a departure from your previous films in terms of aesthetics?
No, I think in terms of the filming, it certainly is in continuation, because I like this business of just hanging around and observing people with the camera. So that we're doing here also. In terms of the editing, it is a departure, and like in early 90s, I saw Wiseman's films and I was fascinated. And then I went and saw many more of his films and many other American direct cinema filmmakers. So some of the films I had edited at that time were more edited and structured in that fashion. And we tried that with this one, but it didn't seem to be working because of many different stories. We didn't have one single protagonist. We thought we'd bring ourselves in, but even that didn't seem to really work. I'm very happy that Obro came on, and then we happened to see a couple of films. I know we saw many films. Films that one of the ways in which we communicated what we wanted in the film to Obro was to direct him to see certain films. We pick up ideas here and there, and one of the ideas, one of the techniques which we sort of consciously adopted was to have a little bit of the next scene come into the previous scene, or a scene that is going to come 3 scenes away come into the. I mean, I find a lot of films do that, but we hadn't. I hadn't done that in any of my earlier films. So it's not non-linear in any way, but it's just that it prepares you for another scene where where something's going to come up, which may be not immediately relatable to this scene in terms of a character, or sometimes even in terms of a theme, because there are many different issues that are being covered. I mean, all of them broadly within like a critique of development. But some of it may be about road widening, some of it may be about the metro, some of it may be about the airport, or about the private constructions that are coming up, or the displacement of people, or the destruction of homes, or so to tie up all those different issues, which in our head was one issue, but to tie them up visually, this was one technique we consciously adopted. And if you watch the film, you'll find it in different places that has happened.
Also, the idea of Gautam, the even before Obro came, of rewinding certain scenes, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and so it so the sound has played a very critical role also, because one of the things we were trying to communicate, and this is something we discussed with Obro, and he understood it very quickly, is to we didn't want to make a film that gave information in terms of, okay, on such and such day this happened, and this was the law, and this is what the law says, and this is how it was broken. We didn't want to go into that. Instead, we wanted to tell a story of what happens and how do people feel in that situation. So the what Obro has always called the emotional graph of the film had to be built with using sound. So you have to create an affective kind of a atmosphere. So I think so the intercutting, the use of certain kinds of images, the use of sound has played, and music has played an I think a role in creating the kind of feeling of the film, the how you feel when you watch it. And yeah, so I think and when you so yeah, because there are so many multiple stories, it's also impossible to make a kind of a film that clearly it becomes then boring, then you can go read a newspaper article. So I think the idea was to create that feeling of that moment, and that sort of atmosphere.
Hmm.
So I think the sound
Oh.
definitely sound and sound design played a important role.
Hmm. Some people, some filmmakers also strongly believe in having You use the word emotion. Some filmmakers also have believe in having drama in the film, having fiction element, not necessarily acting kind of a fiction, but there's some kind of a drama and
Yeah.
some kind of a created scene or enforced scenes, or some kind of a quote unquote directing things to create some kind of drama, or sometimes using whatever the elements available to have a drama in the editing. So, if you can share any moments in the
Excuse me, I need to
editing.
shut the window.
Okay. We didn't get anybody to fictionalize or even to, but we did set up scenes. So for instance, in the UB city, we had obviously requested that gentleman to show us around, and we kind of had an idea of what we might get. Though we struck upon gold, but we wouldn't know that in each instance. But we didn't ask him or anybody else to go this way or that. We didn't direct the actors like that, but some of the questions are leading questions. Some of what we might have suggested he show us would be towards getting the kind of footage that we think or we thought we might be able to use. So yeah, all of those are there, but we didn't. Beyond that setting up, which happens in any documentary, I guess, we didn't do any. Not that I have anything against fictionalizing, but we didn't.
No,
Yeah, we,
actually, even I'm not. I'm just curious. No, I'm not against. I'm not condemning that. I'm just saying people have a
Yeah,
people have style. That's what I'm curious to know.
yeah, no,
yeah.
I think this was pretty much like very observational for the most part, and we didn't actually intervene in that way. Actually, we didn't. And we didn't need to. There was so much happening. For instance, in that Nanda, in that metro meeting, it was like action in front of us. We didn't
Yes,
need to do any of that.
yes.
So, yeah, we did.
So yeah, so it's observation and it's shooting and very interventionist, I'd say, in the editing process.
Mhm.
So that's how maybe this. And at the moment, I'm thoroughly enjoying working with two other editors on two other films that I'm doing, which are again largely observation in the shooting, but which are more straightforward, less experimenting with the editing. But I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I mean, they're doing things that I would never have thought of. So I'm so happy to be working with editors. It's something I've discovered rather late in life, that you have people called editors. I mean, all the editors I worked with in my early years were people, and it may not be their fault. It may be just my insecurity in letting things go. But I used to sit on their heads and each almost like a frame wise. I must have been a real pain actually. I mean, I remember in the early years, every frame almost, then, one thought of them as somebody who could just operate the machines.
Yeah,
I mean, I've been doing this since, tape days,
yeah, yeah.
Betacam, and you could, like, adjust per frame, and you kind of make sure that they cut it at exactly that frame. So the editor then contributes very little, and it's the director's fault in my case at least, because I didn't let them contribute enough. But here it's quite lovely in terms of structuring, in terms of just in many different things. What are the threads we're following? Yeah, so I'm enjoying this process.
Okay. No, I also I want to ask one more question. See, when we make films about such public causes or any other film, quote unquote activist films, there's always a tendency to expose people. The people have you have a camera which is powerful, and you can go to somebody, and however big or small the person is, in front of a camera, the person becomes slightly vulnerable, and you try
Yes.
to push the person, you expose it. So did you have that opportunity in the film? Did you control yourself? I'm just curious to know, like, as a filmmaker, when you're in the situation, how do you manage that? Where do you stand? Where do you don't cross the line? Certain questions you could have avoided, you would have avoided. Certain shots you would have avoided. Even though editing, you would have said, no, no, this thing shows the person a very bad light. That how do you both of you can answer. How do you where you conscious about it while filming or editing?
So Usha,
Especially this
I mean,
film. Yeah.
like a comparison, maybe even with some of the, I mean, with your, with the work that you're doing. I mean, this business of an ethnographer also coming in and kind of little bit manipulating the situation and the ethical issues around doing that, showing people in a bad light. Um,
Hmm.
why didn't you go first? And I'll
Yeah. So I mean, you don't want to show people in a bad light because you want to show them in a bad light, first of all. And in this film, people showed themselves in a bad light in many occasions because we were one among many cameras there. There were TV channels around. So they were very happy to say the things they did in front of other people's cameras. So in that sense, you know, we didn't want to show them in a bad light, but it just so happened that they said or did what they did. So that's one thing. Secondly, even in situations like, for instance, in one instance, um, we thought that the person we were filming was saying things which would be seen in a very bad light by a certain kind of audience. Others would say, wonderful, amazing that he's doing such great work. So it really depended on the perspective. But we tried to get him to engage in other kinds of questions which would somewhat um, show him in a better light in our eyes, or people who are having our kind of perspective. But he didn't want to, so that's a choice he made. And sure, I think we have for instance, because of the point of view of the film, there have been instances where we've in fact not for instance, the whether it is the UB city or the large mall that was being built, we have made a little bit of fun of that whole situation, but with keeping in mind that that is the dominant voice, and that is the voice that gets accepted, and gets visibility, whereas the other stories don't. For instance, what is happening to Hanmanta in his slum doesn't get that kind of visibility, or what happens to people whose homes have been gone without them being given a hearing, doesn't get. So that is a moral, actually, choice that, if you want to call it moral, I don't even know if it's moral, but if it is from the point of view of telling the story, those are choices that we made. But we didn't go out to sort of, you know, um, no, that we didn't do. Like I said, people just reveal themselves. What, for instance, I can name two three situations. One is in the park, where the women and the people are fighting for the trees and for not getting the metro in that old in that neighborhood in Jayanagar. There, I mean, what happened was, it happened before our eyes. We didn't um, and that's
Hmm.
something we don't see, no, in media. Media will never cover that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But Hagari, some people were being threatened. So, and he was saying things which are not simply true. So we just, but we've edited it very playfully in bits. So
Hmm.
that's that's a choice that we've made.
Yeah. Okay.
playfully and naughtily.
But even to go back to the thing of ethic, even whether it's an ethnographic, in any and many ways, our film is an ethnographic film, is also the underlying. And also, I want to mention that we got consents from everyone. We got written, signed consents. Um,
Hmm.
and the other thing is, I mean, that's your inner ethic. You don't want to represent something that is untrue. And
Hmm.
that's something that you have to hold in yourself if you're a responsible filmmaker or a responsible media.
Researcher, right? I mean, hmm.
And
Yes.
sometimes the truth looks very bizarre. What do? We can't help it.
Okay. Hmm.
Also, I think the truth looks different to different people. I mean, like that last series which I spoke about, coding culture, which I did with Carol Upadhyay, who perhaps should have been credited as co-director, though she's been credited as collaborator. I mean, when I think back on it, but so she, so I mean, the we had to sign. What do you call them? I forget what you call them, but one of those very long legal documents which allowed them to take a look at the a completed film, not just at the footage, not just at anything, to before they gave consent to release the film, and which they all three companies took
They
a
call
look at the
release
film.
form or release form something. Release
So
form.
release form is just like, yeah, you have a location release or a personal release, which you get signed immediately after the filming, or maybe even before sometimes for the location release. But this was after the editing was completed. We had to
Mm.
show them because you can play around with the footage and the editing, and they wanted to ensure that we didn't. So they saw the films, and all three of them actually gave us approval. It's only later when they realized how other people were reacting to when they watched the films that then they didn't, and they'd already given us approval for screening the films, um, in independent, non-commercial spaces. Later, when we went back to them for permission to screen them on television. I mean, I don't even know if we would have got them on, but before we could approach any TV station, we needed to get their clearance, and then they refused.
Mm.
Um, and and that may be because many of them had heard back from people during the screenings, so therefore they were wary of allowing us to let it go out. So yeah, so I think people interpret films differently. I mean, even films in which they see themselves, they're maybe less critical, and also they want to portray a certain image of themselves, which they have.
Mm. Mm.
Um, and the fun part is actually being able to see what it is that they want to portray of themselves. One is not so much trying to catch them out doing something that they're doing, which they don't want to show the rest of the world. One is trying to show what it is that they are wanting to portray of themselves. I mean, sometimes just PR material it can also be read very differently, right? I
Yes,
mean, when
yes,
it's
very true.
contextualized
Mm.
to the film,
Mm.
as we have actually done in
Yeah.
our Metropolis as well. So, but yeah, I mean, I think our Metropolis does. It sits on that razor's edge where there are times when maybe one might feel uncomfortable about what we are up to with some of the people we've filmed, and in fact, maybe I mean, I think in the next two films I'm doing, I'm probably going to be. I mean, it's actually more fun to not do that in many ways. It's more fun to not make fun of people. It's to present them in a way that they're happy with the presentation, and yet that can be read in different ways by other people.
Mm.
So, like
Yes.
Amudan, you yourself said, a lot of people who watch this film and think we are not saying anything bad about anyone, and like, oh, but y'all are not. So that also happens. So it really
Mm.
depends on how people see it.
Yes, yes. Yeah. So let me request Killy. Killy.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yes, now perfect.
Okay. Good morning to all of you. Thank you for that mishap that happened a few minutes back. Okay, I'm basically not from Bangalore. I'm from Chennai, but I've been living in Delhi for the last 2 decades. So I'm one guy who have witnessed Delhi Metro coming up since its inception. So I know what happened in due course of time. In fact, in Delhi, migration happened in a very faster manner in the last 2 decades. When I landed in Delhi in 1996, Delhi was completely different. And now the Delhi is completely different. I mean, if you get into the metro of Rajit Chowk, if you stand upstairs and if you watch, you can't see the floor. I mean, so many heads. It's so crowded, and then migration has happened from all corners of Delhi because there is no economic opportunities around Delhi. As in South India, you have plenty of other cities parallelly, but apart from Delhi, there is hardly you find any city that has been developed. So the major population of North India from all corners come into Delhi. So metro actually has connected and has given space to many people are commuting every day for the daily hoods. That's a different issue because I think Usha was talking that a lot of people were asking whether why is that development being kind of abstracted through this film? But I think this film is very significant. Predominantly in three aspects. I think one is temporality, and then the spatiality and the historicity of the movie. I think what is more significant, I find, is the erasure of public memory that is being brought out in this film. And this particular government is very keen in doing it. I mean, we are living in contemporary political arena such kind that all public memories or public consciousness are being kind of erased in different aspects, starting from history textbooks to the public space and everything. So I think this film, when Central Vista project is coming up, finds its space more appropriate in the entire pantheon of documentary films. I even doubt whether this government has a hidden agenda in constructing this Central Vista project, because all these architecture that is in Delhi are predominantly Indo-Saracenic architecture. And this Indo-Saracenic architecture is derived from Indo-Islamic architecture. Predominantly, it is Indo-Islamic. So I have a different perception whether this government is really into a kind of hidden agenda constructed by a British and having an Indo-Saracenic architecture. So they wanted to have a parallel one in the name of. So I think a lot of things come into play in this movie. As Mr. Amudhan said, I mean, it is not a movie of a campaign or against the government, but I think it keeps. It kinds of puts forth the happenings in the public space in order to have their own perceptions, whether it is being a campaign or whether it is being a protest or whether it is being it is for the good or bad. I mean, it actually, the movie actually allows the other person to judge what it is about and to live with it. I mean, as that person who's been constantly talking about history, taking back to the past and then bringing back to the present, where the Winston Churchill's house has come down or the Yahoo has come up. I don't think so. Any IT guy of this generation of 19, 20 years old would really remember of what Winston Churchill is about. So I think this our generation is very conscious, because we are seeing what has happened in the past and in the present, and moreover, I think the modernity has not gone in a very deepest level into the society as such. It is in a very fragmented manner that we have understood modernity and modernization. It has completely lost its scientific temper, as perceived or visualized by the earlier thinkers of this entire country, who tried to kind of evolve a modern nation state with a different perception. I think the very modernization process itself has undergone a very, very drastic change. As Dipankar Gupta would put it, like, I think we are more into Westoxication than Westernization. I think that is what I think this movie is bringing about. I mean, what basically is development? Are we talking about congestion? But absolutely, after Metro coming up in Delhi, I think my congestion is more now. I find a lot of people kind of in all across every corner of Delhi. I find lots of people coming in and going out. I mean, in fact, the population has increased tremendously in the last 2 decades in Delhi. So I'm able to see what would have happened in Bangalore, because I have a lot of friends in Bangalore. I've visited Bangalore twice or thrice earlier. But yeah, they say, I have a friend who traveled from US, and he went both to Bangalore and Delhi. He came to visit me, and he said Delhi is far better. If I have to travel in Bangalore, I think at least 1.5 hours it takes to kind of travel to 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers. So he said, I mean, so Bangalore is so congested, and it has become more congested now because of the inflow of population and the migration that's been happening. I think this film finds a very good space because of that. And as Samudhan said, it is not a kind of an aggressive film which is against the government or something, but I think it puts forth the reality in the public space to be looked at. That's how I observe this film. But thanks very much for. I was quite surprised to see. I thought it may be a kind of an urban development in general, but then when I saw it was very specific to metro development, and I don't find any of these kind of oppositions in Delhi. Of course, there were cases individually filed by several people who are activists, because there was one case which was very significant in Delhi's metro was the heritage, as the movie talks about, which is right behind my office. I mean, in fact, the metro goes underneath my office. So there was a lot of concerns by the activists or the architecture to kind of change the a line of metro rather than disturbing the architectural design of the heritage site. Such kind of individual cases were happening in Delhi, but there wasn't any huge public uproar as it has happened in the Bangalore. Even I was quite surprised to see the movie. I mean, at least there was some public consciousness that came up to kind of protest, at least to put their voice against the development and the cutting of trees. I think the environmental factor is even more important. That has gone into the developmental process all these years, starting from Chipko movement till now, whatever is happening throughout. Even this Central Vista project, I think there are plenty of trees that are going to be cut. I mean, and though the government claims that there will be a lot of samplings that will be planted throughout to kind of compensate whatever being cut, but then I don't think so. How long these samplings will take? Another 50, 100 years to come up as those trees. I mean, because these trees are not these trees are not kept just yesterday or day before. It is like there are trees which are 100 years old in Delhi. I mean, what is even more paining is like I basically studied in JNU, so we used to come and sit on the top of the hill in JNU because it lies in the Aravalli range, and in the opposite side you find a lot of mountainous rocks that you can visualize. The last 10 years, the entire terrain has been taken by malls and other things. You don't find that terrain itself. So you have lost a lot of natural resources in the process of development. And I could see same thing is happening with Bangalore, and I think it's been happening throughout India. I mean, there are a lot of concrete buildings replacing these real natural resources. So I think this film brings in lots of aspects into it to portray that development also actually affects the entire society in a more rigorous manner. Thank you very much for that film. If there is any other further question, I'll definitely come back. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You want to
No, you
respond
did
to?
ask one question, but you gave us a long reaction, which is good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to respond to what he says? What he said?
Sure.
So about the erasure, I don't know if you read that director's note that we've written. We've also said it's an effort to remember some stories which are getting erased through this process. Some stories which might represent other stories as well. So that's one thing. About Delhi, the protests being much less in Delhi, we've also heard that from many people whenever we've screened it, that the people are surprised at how many activists and also how many people of Bangalore from different walks of life have come together to protest against various development initiatives. I mean, infrastructure development initiatives and cutting of trees and displacement of people and knocking down of buildings. So I think maybe it's been a far more active group of citizenry in Bangalore compared to Delhi. Yeah, that's.
Yeah. So Usha Ramanathan actually has talked about this earlier. Apparently, there were protests, especially when it went into civil lines. And so she doesn't ride the metro. And there were quite a few protests, and I've actually read, to respond to two of your points, I've actually read articles by people who have documented how and these were in poorer neighborhoods. And so there were no protests, but it has changed the face of many neighborhoods, and some of them are poorer neighborhoods. And so that's one thing. And in Bangalore also, there's been scant attention to, forget, we don't even have heritage laws in Bangalore. And for instance, the metro goes overhead in Alsur, which is, a neighborhood that goes back to 1500s. And what it has done, that I've been studying that area actually, and there's no attention given to when you put a metro line in a community, what it does to, social life and the way the space is used in the community. There's very little attention. And even in Delhi, I'm sure that there's not much. Someone can go back and take a look at it maybe. But and the other interesting thing is, these are holy cows. No, you can't even question them. They are about development, about global cities. You can't even say, you can't, when there are alternatives, they don't even want to use alternatives. They push these very high capital intensive projects. There are all sorts of other reasons for doing that. So public transport is one among many reasons. And Dr. Dinesh Mohan has done a lot of work from IIT Delhi on how congestion has increased in Delhi. But thank you, those were very good comments.
Thank you. As you said, Shah, that the metro is like a snake. In the film, it's also, I can see that. It's a snake, a huge snake. Like traveling, moving within the city. They become it becomes a permanent structure, and it covers a big part of the city. It's not like any other one particular company or a factory or some small project. It's like really it covers the entire city, and it goes crisscross. In many cities, there, in Chennai also, they are trying to have metros covering the city. So then it becomes as you rightly said, becomes a permanent structure, like it changes the whole face of the city.
Yes, yes.
The way you look, the city looks, like it's like a cement structure, like just going through a huge structure. It's not something small.
Yes. And it's not just what it does to the look of the city, it changes the way you relate to the city. And it changes the way who relates to the city in what way. Because not everyone rides the metro. And if you look at it, in Bangalore, 50 lakh people ride the bus. Metro carries 4 lakh. So it changes a lot of things, the way real estate develops. It's there in our film also, and anything you pick up and read, it will tell you. It changes. It's called a mutation corridor because it changes the way real estate develop. It allows for real estate development, and so a space that is lived, say a playground, suddenly becomes real estate.
Like yes, go ahead.
Sorry. This is one of the major differences that I find in Delhi, because see, in South, commutation has never been a problem because the public transport system had been very effective over the decades. As you see, buses in Chennai or in Bangalore, but in Delhi, you didn't have a very effective, public transport system since independence, I think. There was the government buses weren't that efficient. They had no many buses to run. The maintenance was very poor. Because I've seen those old Delhi government buses and I've traveled in them. But people were keen to have metro in Delhi because they didn't have any alternate transport system. So you find more commuters in Delhi in metro than in buses, either by cars or in metro. People have actually started limiting their car usage when metro is accessible. So a lot of people, on an average, as per the statistics, I think at least 2 lakh metro commuters every day in Delhi, in one junction, that is in Rajiv Chowk. Then it's unimaginable.
Delhi, the network is much larger. Delhi has a lot
very,
more
very
money.
larger because, absolutely. It has now, the metro has gone into Haryana, the metro has gone into UP, almost the quarter of UP and the quarter of Haryana. So it brings in population from all corners of Delhi. So the inflow of population every day is huge, and it's increasing day by day. And the metro is also increasing its lines as as the population coming in. They're extending their lines into and into and into. I don't know where they're going to. Maybe they'll reach Chennai too. They'll connect Chennai, Bangalore after 50 years. You never know. So that's how it's happening.
In terms of real estate, Usha, you mentioned about the metro creating new kind of real estate uh, business, and in Tamil Nadu we have this four-way tracks covering the entire city because of those super highways. And suddenly, because these roads were built on the agricultural lands, because the earlier roads were smaller, they could not widen the roads, so they had to shift the whole road map to agricultural fields. Because of these highways running through the agricultural fields, all those agricultural fields have become vulnerable to real estate now.
Yes.
Suddenly you are just slicing, opening the country field to the real estate just by one project. This whole project is suddenly, like, because there's a new life coming around the highways. Suddenly there's an economy, there are real estate, there are colleges, there are businesses. And so earlier the agriculture fields were away from the highways, they were far away from them. Now they are in the middle. Highways are in the middle of the agriculture fields. See, it's totally has changed the whole real estate concept in Tamil Nadu. I mean, we could say that from Tamil Nadu experience.
Yes.
Even our airport, actually, the road to the airport killed so many people soon after it came up because it cuts through fields. So somebody owns a field, he has to cross over, she or he has to cross over to the other part of their field. And there were no crossover points, there were no safe crossing points. So on a monthly basis, I don't know exactly, I don't have the figures, but a very large number of people were killed on that road to the airport. Now they built some overbridges, I think. But at that time, it was
Yes.
soon after it came up. They hadn't planned for that. They spent so much money on the road itself, but they hadn't planned for these crossover points.
Yes. Okay.
So,
So I think we've covered a bit. And if you want to say anything more, we can.
okay. This is one thing I wanted to
Yes,
add.
Usha, yeah.
Selva, you remember Selva in our film?
We can't hear you, Usha.
You remember Selva in our film?
Yes. Yes.
Who works with slum communities. Like he says, cities have become about land because governments are, and this is something I've been following also, governments are accumulating agricultural land and public lands and just land as land banks to parcel out to companies. So cities are no longer about living, it's all about land.
Yes. Yes.
I think most people in Gurgaon, in Haryana, which is the bordering of Delhi, became filthy rich within a day, within a night, by just selling their lands to the government. They had, because that's an agricultural land. I've seen Haryana with nothing, just you will find the houses very distantly placed, but then now it's all of the multinational companies, IT companies, which have come in and sold, the lands have been sold, and all became suddenly having all those guys who had buffaloes suddenly having Audi cars and cars coming in with no absolute civilized behavior. I mean, absolutely they are still in their traditional conservative mindset, but with the modern equipments they have. That is what I think the very modernization process itself is in a very staggering manner, no stability being, because that's how I think the entire modernization process has degraded over the years since its independence, which had a vision,
Correct.
which had a scientific temper. I think that scientific temper has gone away, and just a kind of an without the content, only the form has come out. That's where the problem has arisen in the entire society. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Kili, you almost called them, called the farmers of Haryana uncivilized. Almost.
No, farmers are
I'm
different.
just,
I'm not talking about the
I'm
farmers
just
at all.
joking. I'm just joking. I'm just joking. Just touched.
They were absolute landlords who sold it. I mean, farmers they hardly had any land. Farmers hardly had any land in these areas.
No, I'm just teasing her. Okay. So I think we have covered everything. You have anything else you add, Usha or Gautam? We can wind up the session.
No, thank you for inviting us. Thank you
Thank you.
for the conversation.
Thank you,
And
Gautam.
one
Thank
day
you.
film
Yes.
so that people can watch it and
Yes. I'll keep showing films. That's a as long as now we have more venues to show, so it's an opportunity for us to keep showing films. In fact, I'm thinking of showing films every day. So what's the point of showing it every week? You just keep it on, like so that people can anytime you come to a blog, they can watch a film.
great.
Which is as easy as possible.
Do you know Reena well, Amudhan?
Yes.
Okay. Because they're starting some initiative for more distribution of films.
Okay.
But viewing is part of that effort, I
Mm.
presume. So
Mm-hmm.
she should really get in touch with you.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I know her. We are in touch. We haven't spoken about this, but we are in touch. Yes.
Mm.
So thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you
you.
all. Bye
Bye.
bye. Bye bye bye.
Bye,
Thank you.
Amudhan. Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
Kelly. Bye,
See
Kelly.
you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Calling
Thank
off.
you. Bye bye. Bye.